Thank you very much. It is 8 minutes past 7. Broadband, and in particular superfast broadband, powers modern life for business and, of course, for pleasure. Today the government is telling us, as we were hearing in the news, that 3 million more homes and businesses can now get superfast broadband speeds because of a government programme, and they say they're on target to have 95% of the country covered by 2017. We can talk to Christopher Price, who's Director of Policy for the Country Land and Business Association, and is here. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
What the government says very clearly this morning, the programme is working. Do you agree? Is it working? Are you happy with what's happening?
Well, I think the starting point is that the target itself isn't sufficient for most businesses, and particularly rural businesses. The government defines superfast broadband as 24 megabits, but the EU will require us to have superfast broadband of 30 megabits by 2020, so we're already planning to be in the second stream. But most importantly, it still leaves 5% unaccounted for, with no targets, no promise of when rural businesses and farmers will be able to access broadband in the same way as everyone else can.
Is it about money?
It's partly about money, but it's a huge challenge. It's technologically difficult, it's expensive, it's a lot to be done. But in the modern age, you can't expect farmers and rural businesses to be able to manage without superfast broadband in the same way as everyone else.
What we are expecting is that BT is involved and paying to some extent for this. Would you like to see a change in the way the funding is provided? Have we reached a stage, do you think, where this is simply a utility that the state needs to be providing? Would you say that there are other more imaginative ways of funding? What's going wrong, do you think?
It's certainly a utility that the state needs to provide in the same way as we have a universal post office service. It's not straightforward. There are various technological challenges. There's no one-size-fits-all. To get from the last stage, from the cabinet in, say, the village, to every remote farm or rural business, we will need a variety of technologies. We'll need to be using satellite technology. We'll need to be using wireless Wi-Fi technology. If you've got a good signal, 4G will often help.
Yeah, and 5G in the future. And the government says we're onto all this. We're doing the research. We're there. What is it that you're saying is holding them back?
But
you don't seem convinced that they are.
We haven't got a great record of meeting targets to date. We are all supposed to have basic broadband by 2012. That didn't happen. We were supposed to have 90% with superfast broadband by this year. That didn't happen. The government's record on this isn't great.
What a lot of people tell us about those who don't have superfast broadband at the moment is that they're not living in impossibly remote areas where you might think, oh yes, that is terribly difficult, plainly that sign is going to have to wait. There are actually quite a few of them in cities, in London, in other places. What is going wrong for them? Because that's not really a technological challenge, isn't it? It's obvious that the companies don't see a profit to be made in linking them up, and something has to be tweaked to make it happen.
You're right. That's almost certainly part of it. And we're not just talking about remote areas either. I mean, remote areas present their own challenges, but we're talking over half the landmass of the United Kingdom will not have superfast broadband under the government's aspirations.
Half the landmass of the country?
It's a huge amount of land we're talking about.
Yes. So the areas covering half the landmass?
Exactly.
Yes, so those pockets are not simply in far remote places.
They're more than pockets.
Yeah, and that's very much called out
areas.
By many people who've already written us to this morning. There'll probably be more too, saying that they live in places that aren't at all remote, but they don't yet have it. All of this we will put to Ed Vaizey, the Minister of State for the Digital Economy, at 8:10. Christopher Price, thanks.
Thank you.
The time is 8:10. If you want to get people's blood boiling in many areas of the countryside, mention superfast broadband, or indeed in some areas, any kind of broadband. The connection that allows much of modern life to happen, allows businesses to prosper, allows people to contact each other easily, to do homework, to fill in forms, etc. That connection has been missing from many areas, and not necessarily very remote areas. We heard in the news that the government announces today that progress is being made, and in a moment we'll hear from the minister responsible. But first, Simon has been to the southwest of England, not exactly the ends of the earth, but an area where broadband is not what it could be.
It's feeding time for the sheep and the cows here at Woodhane Farm, pretty much on the border between Devon and Somerset. And I'm here with Steve Horner, who's the farmer here. This feels pretty rural, and this is exactly the kind of place where people struggle to get broadband. What is the problem as you see it from here?
There are a lot of rural businesses around here. We're not remote. Just down below us there you can see where the traffic's moving is the A303. Up on the top there is the A30, so there are two arterial roads, both with fibre optic cables running in ducts up and down them, and it's scandalous we can't get our hands on those cables. I can't get my business done properly. I've just got a very slow broadband speed.
Whose fault is it?
I think it's ineptitude on the behalf of the local government. They failed to negotiate a contract with British Telecom. I'm a parish councillor for Yarcombe, and we've got 50 small businesses, including farmers, in the parish, and if those small businesses don't have broadband, they won't survive.
One such business is Bondstones, an architectural practice located 4 miles across the Somerset border in the village of Churchenford. Ian Firth runs the firm.
The quality of the network we've got here is abysmal, and from my perspective as a rural business owner, it's very difficult to operate with a poor quality service to start with. But it's increasingly difficult to plan ahead for the business to actually grow in this area.
What have you had to do? What lengths have you had to go to get around this?
We've currently explored moving down to Cullumpton, which is on the motorway. There's a good business park just up the road that we could have looked at moving into, but the signal there is atrocious and won't be improved for a significant period of time. At the moment, I'm commuting 15 miles each way to go to an office. Ideally, I don't want to do that. I want to be able to employ people in the local area. Half the council's focus over the last 10 years or so has been teleworking and trying to avoid people using cars.
The local authority in charge of getting superfast broadband to the area is called Connecting Devon and Somerset, or CDS. Last month, they rejected a contract bid from BT for part of the second phase of the rollout. Andrew Ledbetter is a spokesperson for CDS. I put to him some of the frustrations expressed by local residents and businesses.
I hear their frustration, I feel their frustration, and we will come up with a solution. But we just didn't have enough money in the first tranche to go everywhere in Devon. We probably needed twice as much money, so we had to go where we get the most bangs for our buck. And that wasn't places like a Bottery, which, although they say they can see a road, the exchange is actually quite a few miles away. And then the properties are all spread out, so it just wouldn't have brought the superfast speeds to them.
Otter?
Yeah, that's the only one. It's a local brewery. Okay. A mile away.
Now we've come to the Sidmouth Arms in Up Ottery, where we're going to have a little town meeting with some of the people who feel particularly exercised about this problem.
I'm Graham Long, a Pottery Parish Councillor.
Mike Hensman, small businessman in Rawridge.
Richard Price, I'm an ex-CEO of an IT company.
Marcus Durant, I run a design consultancy in a pottery. It affects me daily on just from very simple task of keeping an exchange server synchronised, trying to send out an email with a 50 meg file, for instance, and hoping that the server doesn't get bored of my internet connection before it times out and I have to try again.
If I use Skype, I can't really use a camera because there's not enough bandwidth to have pictures and audio, so I had to trade off what I use, which is, if you're trying to run a business remotely, very difficult.
What should be done about it, and whose responsibility is it?
Well, it's partly the government, and it's certainly the local authorities. The government in the sense that they actually structured a programme here that is actually not future-proof. They have allowed, and the local authorities have allowed BT to offer one solution, which is an urban-centric solution, this so-called fibre to the cabinet, which leaves the local loop, the last connection to the property, as copper, and that is just a bottleneck in the whole process.
The thing that gets my goat is we're 10 miles from Taunton, which is a county town, we're 10 miles from Honiton, which is a market town, and we're called too remote. This is not the middle of the Sahara. This is not the middle of Arizona.
There is no vision behind this project. There's no expectation of what this is going to do to the economy. And quite frankly, fibre broadband is as important to this country in this century as the railways were in the last century.
Those views from the border between Devon and Somerset, collected by Simon Jack, and we'd like to hear more from you directly. We already have heard a huge amount of correspondence on the subject this morning. The email address today at bbc.co.uk, or the Twitter handle at bbcr4today, the Facebook page, the Today programme. But before you let us know what you think, have a listen to Ed Vaizey, who's the Minister of State for Culture and the Digital Technology, the digital economy, and is on the line now. Good morning to you, Mr. Vaizey.
Good morning.
Do you accept that the rollout of broadband has been mishandled?
No, not at all. I think today's announcement shows that it's going extremely well. We've passed 3 million premises. We set ourselves a target of 90% by the end of 2015, and I think we're going to reach that target. And we've set ourselves a target to get to 95% of premises in the UK by the end of 2017, and I think we'll hit that target as well. So I think the scheme's been very, very successful.
What do you say to the people in that report who were angry, and to the people who've contacted us this morning from places like Lancaster, Pimlico in central London, Chester, Redditch, all around the country, who say they don't have access to superfast broadband, they don't know when they will get it, they're not in remote areas, and something is going wrong? And as someone in that report said, it's that last local loop bit that is not being completed, and possibly that is because the government hasn't done a proper deal with BT to force them to do it.
I completely disagree. I mean, I agree with them in terms of their frustration. So often when I come on programmes like this, people will be quoted who haven't got broadband, and they are frustrated, and I completely agree with them, and that is why we're doing this programme. So we have this kind of slightly surreal debate where people complain they haven't got broadband, and I agree with them, because that's why we've put together a £1.7 billion programme to get to as many people as possible.
But their point is, number one,
let me say there are 3 million homes now that have broadband that wouldn't have had broadband. You could have interviewed anyone from those homes who have got broadband, but you chose to interview people who haven't, and I share their frustration. So we have plans to get to 100% of the country by the end of this Parliament. We're looking at new technologies, because it is extremely expensive to get to the most difficult to reach homes.
Well, not in Pimlico,
and we want to. There are some problems in some cities. Obviously, our cities have much better broadband than many other areas, but there are missed pockets. But already,
the problem is
already
that
we're
BT,
seeing additional investment from BT, and also Virgin Media have announced £3 billion worth of investment in superfast broadband in cities.
Are you happy with the way they're behaving, BT in particular, but the other companies as well? You're completely happy. You think they're doing well in this?
BT are a partner in this programme, so the government puts money in, local councils like Devon and Somerset put money in, but BT puts its own money in as well. And I think the other point that people haven't picked up on is that BT has paid back to the government £129 million. It's paid it back much earlier than it could have done under the terms of the contract, because we put together a contract where if more people took up broadband above a certain level, we would get money back. That £129 million will now be reinvested in superfast broadband to get to even more homes than we originally targeted.
But
so
you
I think
accept
BT's
that there is a problem,
very good job.
All right, they've done a very good job up to now, you say, but again, people say we live quite close to the box in many cases, and it's the final bit from that box to our home that isn't being done, and that's because it's difficult or costly for BT, actually costly more than difficult, and that the incentive isn't there for them to do it. Do you accept that?
Well, as I say, if you go back to the key points about what we've achieved today, we set out a target to get to 90%. That was a very clear and open target. We didn't, dissemble about it. We said we had the money. We thought we could get to 9 out of 10 homes. We're going to reach that by the end of 2015. That's a great achievement. 3 million homes have been passed under this programme. We have the best broadband of the big 5 economies in Europe.
Yeah, I know all of that, but I'm specifically asking about those cases where people live close to boxes and they're not being joined up to them in a way that they think would be relatively easy, but seems to be costly for the companies. Do you accept that?
As the person you interviewed from, who was leading the programme in Devon and Somerset, said, we partner with local authorities. Local authorities make the decision about where the money can be spent most effectively. So
and you're happy that they're doing that well?
Absolutely. They will spend the money where they can get as many homes as possible onto superfast broadband, which is why we've passed this incredible target of 3 million homes, which is really an astonishing achievement. It's a complex engineering project, as the spokesman for the Country Land and Business Association acknowledged in his interview with you an hour ago. It is a complex technology project. We should be very proud indeed of what we've achieved.
Just coming up to 7:30, after talking to the Culture Minister, Ed Vaizey, earlier in the week, and he made a very bullish defence of the rollout of broadband and superfast broadband, we had, quite a lot of contact from you, and from a number of dissatisfied people who felt that their broadband setup was not very good, and that this country was falling behind. A lot of dissatisfied customers. Not all of them, here's the interesting thing, in rural areas. Some were, but quite a few weren't. Let's listen to little group of people that we've voiced up.
I live in a Lincolnshire village where the present broadband is so slow as to be almost useless. I have been watching the Openreach website for over a year now, and the availability of new superfast broadband has shown for all that time as available within 6 months for our postcode.
In the Isle of Harris, we've just discovered that although the cable passes our house on the west coast within about 5 metres, BT are not providing any connection to it, nor to any of the other houses in West Harris. We find this astounding, as all the rest of the island, including the lower populated, remote and inaccessible areas to the north and east, have been connected.
Our usual speed is less than 1 megabyte, most often too slow to even use BT's own speed check. It times out. There are 10 houses in our hamlet in Herefordshire, and not one of us has fast broadband.
And as I say, not just hamlets in Herefordshire. Bob Neal is co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on London and is the MP for Bromley and Chislehurst.
The key thing is, here's London, the principal economic powerhouse of this country, one of the major international world financial centres, and we've got broadband speeds which are on average only about half of those in other European cities. You can get broadband 3 times faster in Bucharest, in Romania, than you can in London. I do think there is a real problem with the way in which BT and Openet have been delivering some of this. As I say, already we've had BT not delivering on what has been promised so far, and although there are some pockets of London which are very good, around the main financial districts, an awful lot of business, an awful lot of Londoners who aren't finding that level of connectivity. So that's why I think we need a renewed approach to this, where we actually have perhaps almost a task force to look at the issues around London, because London is so important to the British economy. It contributes a great deal to the British economy, and I think Londoners are entitled to have the same levels of broadband connection that they could find if they were living in most of the other major capital cities of Europe.
Let us talk to Dido Harding, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Talk Talk and is in our radio car. Good morning to you.
Morning.
What do you think the problem is?
Well, I think the problem here is that you've got everyone's eggs in one basket, which is we're all dependent on BT Openreach building out the network. And that's always a bad place to be when you've only got one choice as someone to go to.
And is that problem, as you see it, solvable easily? Because one would assume that if it was, and if there was a real chance of getting other companies involved in putting out the network, in rolling out the network, then that chance would have been seized. There is a reason, after all, isn't there, that the eggs have been put in that one basket.
Well, it's clearly not solvable easily, otherwise it would have been solved by now, but you have got other companies starting to invest. So Virgin are expanding their network, Sky and Talk Talk together are trialling fibre to the premise in York. So you've got some green shoots of competition. And Ofcom, the regulator, can do an awful lot to encourage more infrastructure competition.
What should they be doing?
So it's not a hopeless... Well, first of all, I think they should be forcing BT to be much more transparent about what they are doing with the government subsidy that they're spending today. So one of the problems is for the very rural areas where there might be small start-ups willing to challenge BT and create competition, they don't know where BT's building. And the local government authorities are not necessarily publishing that information because they're under confidentiality agreements with BT. So forcing much greater transparency of where the money is going, where it's going to be built past, will make it easier for other companies to decide where to go.
How behind are we? I mean, we heard some people there talking about, well, we heard the MP there talking about Bucharest. I mean, to the extent that particularly super-fast broadband is being rolled out, and we heard this from the Minister, there are reasonable speeds around the country, but then you hear actually much better speeds in other parts of Europe. What do you think the picture is?
Well, like everything, it's not completely black and white. We are very slow, very, very slow in rolling out fibre to the premise. And that's actually the infrastructure that you want to invest in for the next 100 years. So that's a fibre right the way through to your home or your business. And to be honest, we don't even get on the chart of the top 50 countries with fibre to the premise in the world.
Top 50?
So that is very bad. Yes.
That's extraordinary.
Believe it or not, the Ukraine has got more fibre to the premise rolled out than the UK has. So in that, we are very bad. In terms of the rollout of broadband, copper broadband, and the take-up of it, we're pretty good. So, this is a product, just pure copper broadband, that only about 86% of the population take today, but that would put us in the top 5 around the world. So it's not completely black and white, but this is the infrastructure that's going to drive economic growth here for the next 100 years. So we should be really, really obsessed about getting it right.
Yeah, and what some people say, it's a bit like the post office or Royal Mail's instruction that they have to deliver to everyone, that actually there should be more imposition, not only of rules, but also potentially that the government should be coming up with money in order to make sure that all of this happens. Is that side of it, do you think, being arranged properly?
Well, I think the last parts of the country where it is technically difficult to get this and therefore hard commercially to make it pay back, the inevitable reality is that there will be some form of public subsidy, just as you see with the current final bits of rollout. But without transparency and greater competition, the government ends up getting ripped off, and that's us as taxpayers being ripped off. So I don't think the real problem here is actually the money, strangely enough. The real problem is making sure that you create competition to drive innovation, to solve the technical challenges of how you get broadband to the far-reaching parts of the country that are definitely screaming out for it.
We asked to talk to BT. They didn't want to talk to us this morning. Dido Harding from TalkTalk, Chief Executive of TalkTalk. Thanks very much.